In less than a week, a new season will be released in Destiny 2, and that means the season of Plunder is almost at a close. The season will stick around for another 3 months, which means that you can still witness all of the story and content that I'm about to go over, but there will be nothing new once a new season gets released. Therefore, we are at the time where I give my opinion of the season, and this one's a tad mixed. First off is the story. The story for this season was fairly basic, and it got a bit repetitive over the course of the 8 weeks that it lasted. The main story, at least. So it saw us competing with other fallen crews, or elixir crews, however you want to say it, for relics of Nezarec. Nezarec being a disciple of the Witness, who actually governed the Lunar Pyramid, I believe, and got killed during the collapse, it seemed. And the season was Aramis, who got released at the very, very beginning of the season in a cutscene. Aramis was trying to get each of the relics, and we were trying to stop her from getting the relics. Naturally, we got all of the relics for ourselves, 8 of them, over the course of 8 weeks. Quite predictable. And that was pretty much how the story went. It also saw a bit of evolution for different characters, such as Spider. He became a bit more happy being under the Traveller. He moved to the last city at the beginning of the season due to Drifter making a wee deal with him to get him out of the Tangled Shore. Seems like Queen Mara wants him dead, or at least captured. And it also saw some development for Ido, who was not a new character. Ido was actually introduced a year ago in Season of Splicer, as far as I'm aware, but we never actually saw her in person, and we got a bit more personality to her and evolution, so that was quite nice. Mithrax also got this whole backstory of being a pirate, which I feel was kind of not needed, but it exists now, so definitely wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was a bit, out of nowhere, considering he's already a splicer, and we also did see him in the year 1 of Destiny 2 as a normal captain. But that's besides the point. There's 3 main sources of story for this season, and that was Catch Crash, Expedition, and the weekly quest. Catch Crash and Expedition were fairly basic. Catch Crash saw us fighting another pirate crew on a different catch to try and get information about where a relic could be and also where their treasure was stored. It didn't really evolve over the course of the season. I think a couple new lines might have been added in, such as there was one with Eris and Drifter, which I think might have been added after there was a wee bit of story with them one of the weeks in the background. But we saw different characters such as Drifter, Mithrax, Ido, Spider, Eris, and even Scene 14 chipping in. And I'm assuming that's due to Scene 14's previous connections in Season of Splicer. And it didn't really evolve at all. And that was pretty much the entire story for the activity. So that was about it. Quite repetitive, but it's nice flavour for an activity, I suppose. Expedition was then right off the tail of Catch Crash. This is where we go to then get the treasure that we just found the coordinates for on the catches. There wasn't really any evolution, and it was pretty much the same dialogue the entire season. I don't think it actually changed, but it was about getting resources for the elixir in the last city to build up the elixir quarter a bit. So that was good at least. Didn't evolve though, which is a bit of a minus in my books. Having said that, in previous seasons there's really only been one activity. So for Haunted there was Containment, for Risen there was the Strike type things, the PsyOps I believe they're called. So there was just one activity for those seasons. I think that's been the format basically every season, so this season we got 2. The main source of content for the story was the weekly quest. So this took place over 8 weeks, as I've already said. It every week consisted of a basic structure, which was listen to a message at the star chart, retrieve a relic from a pirate hideout, talk to Spider, and debrief at the elixir quarter. Sometimes there would be a cutscene or a interaction between characters, and then there would be an audio message at the elixir quarter, a helm message from Ido about the relic you just gathered, and then a lore book. Typically, the audio that you would get in the elixir quarter would tie in with the lore book, so that's kind of how that would work. Overall, the story was quite good. It was obviously the entire story of the season. That's mainly how they distribute the story for the season. And over those 8 weeks, we went into 8 pirate hideouts. We got all the relics for Nezarec. We also encountered Aramis at the very end. Halfway through, we had a wee bit of like a parlay with Aramis and talked to her a bit. There was quite good development of Ido over the course of the 8 weeks. We saw her go from being this just a scribe, just trying to help as much as she can, to then trying to get through to Aramis because she believes there's actually good in her. Mithrax started off a bit wary about doing all this. Then he didn't want Ido to be involved at all. Then he got annoyed at Ido because she tried to contact Aramis directly. And then at the very end, they made up and they're happy again. So it was all quite good. Spider over the course of the season also became happier to be underneath the Traveler, which was nice. Drifter just kind of was there being Drifter, but he seemed to actually become more likable. In my opinion, I already like Drifter, but I think I've seen people say that they actually like him a bit more now after the season because he genuinely seemed to be trying to help. So yeah, there was quite a bit of development. The Sneak Order also didn't change at all until the last season, or the last 2 weeks of the season, which I'm going to get onto in a second here. But that was sort of the main structure of that quest. My opinion is that the star chart introduction for each week is good. I think that's quite nice. It gives a bit of a recap of what happened the previous week, where you are in the story, which is good for some people who may, just play it and forget what just happened or not the most involved in the story. Retrieving the relics each week was also enjoyable. It was much better than just, I don't know, doing some random thing and just like, oh, look, that's happened. At least there was actually a reason why we were doing this. You're actually going to each pirate hideout yourself. You're actually getting the relic yourself. There was information on it. The way they handled Ido sort of researching it and then telling you about it afterwards was also very nice. That could easily be missed, however, because there wasn't really any indication to go to the helm. But that whole thing was quite nice. The Sneak Order elements were also really good. Usually you kind of go to the section in the helm where the season takes place and there's like interactions there, but this season it was in the Sneak Order. And the story over the course of the season did see quite good character development, as I've said. It did build up. There were some twists. We got the one of the pirate hideouts was empty, and we didn't know why. Somebody had attacked and we didn't know who it was, and it got people guessing like, who is it? Is it the Cabal? Because we knew that they were going to be involved in the Lightfall. Was it Callus's Legion? Was it the Lucent Hive? Was it a different Guardian? Who was it? And then it ended up being the Lucent Hive, and that involved they came in at the very end of the 8 weeks of story, because then they tried to, Ida went in by herself and almost got herself killed, and Irma saved her and all that sort of stuff. So it came to a nice wee conclusion, but I quite like that it didn't come to a big grand conclusion. Haunted came to this big conclusion where Callus became a disciple, essentially. That was very grand, but it suited Haunted because it was quite an important season, whereas Plunder's less of an important season. It's mainly just the Elixir Quarter story, which isn't really, or the Elixir story, which isn't tied into the whole light dark saga, but it does bring Nezarec into the picture. And what I'm assuming there is that Nezarec's going to be revived in some way, or he's going to be used to revive Osiris, considering Scene 14's involvement. But that sort of thing's good because we don't necessarily know where it's going to go, and it leads people to kind of think about it and try and guess themselves what's going to happen, which is great in my opinion. That's my positives for the season, essentially. There are a few negatives. The repetitive structure became a bit predictable, basically. It was very repetitive each week in that it was the same structure. You know where you're going to get your story, you knew what was going to happen, and you knew you were going to get all the relics at the end because they were stacking up on a table and there was exactly 8 slots, so you knew you were going to succeed, and it was quite predictable in that regard. But the way the story unveiled was also quite well thought out, and it was very good, but it did become predictable and it was a repetitive structure, so it was a bit bad in that regard. I also feel, and this is actually quite a big negative for me, even though it's a relatively minor detail, the Elixir Order should have developed over the course of the season instead of being used as just a makeshift community event. In case you're unaware, there was a community event in which the community completed it within a day because there was a glitch, but the Elixir Order got improved in 7 stages over the course of that event. So over the course of a day, it improved in 7 stages. And none of them are really that noticeable. There was like a farm, the ether tank up, you know, a few improvements. There's a wee town square, which was really just the Insurrection Prime or whatever it's called, with seats around it. So there wasn't really any major things. In fact, the most major thing is the fact that there were Rasputin's symbols on some of the frames that are sweeping up the floor. But that should have been done throughout the season. There's 7 changes. There's 8 weeks of content, but I'm including the first week, which was the introductory week. Therefore, you could have had a change every week after that. And it would have been something people look at and be like, oh, that's nice. Or they might not have noticed it the first week, they might have noticed it the second week. That should have been done instead of being used as a community event. And I think in that case, it would have been much more appreciated had it been noticed. Overall, the story was very good. The lore book provided also some nice just wee stories. I included them at the end of my videos for each week. They're nice wee bonuses basically. They tie into the audio in the Elixir Quarter, as I said already. It was a nice, light-hearted story, in as light-hearted a way as you can be whenever you're collecting parts of a dead person. But it was, pirate-themed, Elixir, getting more story on that side is also always very nice. I think they need to change the repetitive structure, but that also will be covered in my gameplay, which is the next section I'm going to get onto. This season brought 2 new activities instead of just the usual one, being Catch Crash and Expedition, as I've already mentioned. Catch Crash followed a fairly basic structure. As I've already said, it was invading another catch to try and get information where their plunder was or where the relics were. But it basically followed the structure of start on your catch, fight off invaders, charge up cannons, which involve just standing on a plate, keep them away from enemies, and then eventually you can board the other ship. There'll then be an encounter. Then you see the boss and clear out the room, and then put down a flag basically. Then you do another encounter, and you have the boss. And there was 3 encounters, so you have to do 2. And there's also 3 bosses, and of course there's only 1 boss each go. This used to rotate weekly. I think it might rotate daily now, but that tends to be what they do with these seasonal activities. Overall, it's a fun activity. I quite like it. The boss names are especially amusing because it's I is the Shank, then there's Ransax and Skiffix. They have quite different mechanics. The Shank just basically flies around, shields himself every third of his health with servitors, and that's about it. One of them shields himself every third of his health, but uses a different element shield, and you have to charge up, you have to defuse a bomb each time, and then you also have one which just sends loads of enemies into this wee room that you're contained in until the very end where you can damage them. So quite fun bosses. The activities or the encounters are blowing up ether tanks with explodey balls that you get from defeating enemies, blowing up 2 tanks in a single room by using scorch cannons that destroy shield generators that shield them or prevent them being damaged. And then the last one is like a security room where you have to defeat a servitor to charge up a plate, and then you can defeat the big eye essentially. So these can be in any order. One time you can get the ether tanks and then the tanks, or you can get the walker tanks then the ether tanks, or you can get whatever order, which keeps it somewhat fresh. But my main gripe is that it's the exact same every time. It's the exact same location. You're always going to have 2 out of the 3 encounters. Doesn't matter what order they're in, you're still going to play them. So it gets a bit repetitive, and I really wouldn't want to play more than 5 catch crashes at a push, in one sitting. That's a bit much, but I wouldn't want to play multiple in a row is what I'm trying to say. The main reason to play catch crash is to get treasure map fragments, and they are used to then create treasure maps, which you use an expedition to get loot at the end. So expedition is a bit better. I quite enjoy Expedition. It takes place in 3 different locations, the Cosmodrome, Nessus and Europa. There is 3 bosses, 1 for each location, and it essentially involved starting a drill to mine treasure. Then engrams will shoot up out of the ground when you kill enough enemies. You chuck the engrams at the hull, or like a wee movable ship, and then once you've got enough progress you can then transport the ship to a different area, just escort it to a different area. Then you do the exact same thing, then you escort it another 50%, and then there's a boss. And that's pretty much the structure. But it's a bit better than that, because there's random elements. You can have ruffians spawn, which are just glorified champions essentially, which drop a load of treasure when you kill them. you can have jammers, which switches off your drill essentially, and you have to go somewhere and destroy the drill. And then when you're transporting the haul, you can also get a saboteur to spawn in, which is basically just a champion that you have to destroy. So it keeps it quite fresh, I think. It's quite an enjoyable activity, but it does get a bit of a negative mark against it due to the seal. But before we get onto that, the weekly quest. This is by far the worst part of the season, I think, in terms of gameplay. It's very repetitive. It follows the same structure every single week, and there's just unneeded parts to it. So typically, you go to the star chart, talk to whoever it is, then you get a random objective to play Catch Crash or Master Catch Crash or do an expedition or truck treasure or whatever. Then you can go into a pirate hideout, then you go to the Elixir Quarter and talk to those people, then you go to the helm and you hear what Ido has to say. That's essentially the structure. And aside from the fact you have to just transport yourself around all these different locations, the random objective is just really annoying because it doesn't have any sort of relation to whatever the story is. It just happens to be seasonal content you're playing. So that's really annoying, and it can get rid of your enjoyment for the story because you're annoyed that you have to do this stupid requirement, especially whenever it's something like play Master Catch Crash and you're not necessarily a high enough level that you feel confident playing it. On top of that, the pirate hideouts, which were the weekly missions, were also really poor in the later weeks. They started off not too bad. I actually quite liked them to begin with because they are essentially just lost sectors. Not just essentially, they are. They're reused lost sectors from destinations which are already vaulted. There's one from Mars and two from the Tangled Shore. And they're redecorated, they look different, but they're the same actual layout and they function the exact same, just different enemies, whatever. And for the first 3 weeks, I was really happy. I was guessing what would the lost sector be this week, what enemies would there be, and that sort of thing. And you're going there to pick up a relic at the very end, sure, but it's basically as a glorified lost sector you're playing. I quite liked it because there's no real point in creating a brand new environment or mission if you don't necessarily need to, if it's not vital, because the location you're in isn't actually important, it's the fact you're going there to get a relic. Unfortunately, there were only 3 lost sectors, and therefore 2 of them got reused once, and 1 of them got reused twice. This ruined the pirate hideouts for me. The one thing they did do was made it so as you entered from the exit the second go round, but it really just put a bad mark on it for me. I stopped enjoying the pirate hideouts. They became a bit of a joke. There were some story changes. I liked the story of them, but gameplay wise, horrendous after the 3rd week. I'm all for reusing content if new content doesn't necessarily need to be made for it. If the old content suits, perfectly fine, but if you're going to use it like that, that's just terrible. Lastly, we have the seal. The way it worked is, as per usual really for a season, there were 10 triumphs, and you'll notice I'm saying were because it's changed. So how it works is there are 10 triumphs, you have to do all 10 of them, and they are as follows. Defeat 8 pirate lords. You defeat the pirate lord at the end of a pirate hideout, so you basically just do the story, the seasonal story. You also have to listen to all the radio messages in the Elixir Quarter, which again is just by doing the story. You need to purchase all 21 upgrades at the star chart. You have to collect treasure beacons, which are small, medium and large. You get them from just playing the season and getting more sort of repute at the star charts, that's fine. They were quite nice, it's like a treasure hunt. In different locations you have to decipher pirate texts and stuff like riddles. It was really fun. That honestly was a really big bonus to the season for me. You then had to summon 15 of each first mate. That's easily doable in my books if you just play the season, because over the course of however long the season is, you're going to be able to summon them in like 15 times each, especially because you can really summon in a first mate twice in one go. Complete Catch Crash on Master, straightforward enough once you have a high enough level. Then defeat all Catch Crash boxes, easy. Deposit 250 of treasure into the haul during expeditions, again, easy, you just end up doing that. Defeat 50 ruffians, which was a pure pain point for me, and a lot of people it seems, and then craft 3 weapon patterns from this season. And that has to be pirate themed weapons that you get from like Expedition and Catch Crash and the star chart. I'm a 2 out of 3 for that. I've done everything else, except I haven't, because they changed the requirements for the seal. So they removed the need to listen to the audio messages, which was extremely pointless in my books, because if you're defeating the pirate lords, you're going to listen to all the audio messages. It's part of the story for the season. The next thing they did was, instead of making a change which had no impact whatsoever, they then went the entire other way and made it too easy, because they ended up making it so as instead of 50 ruffians needed defeated, it was only 10. They also made it so as instead of 21 upgrades you needed for the star chart, it was only 14. They also made it so as you only had to summon in a crewmate 1 time each instead of 15 times. There's a few reasons why this is just a bit silly in my books. First off, they appear to have changed how often ruffians spawn in after they made the change to how many you need. The reason why ruffians was such a pain point is because ruffians only spawn on expeditions. You also have 2 chances for them to spawn during a single expedition, at the first drill site and the second drill site. And they can spawn in twice at each drill site, so in a perfect world you can get 4 in one expedition, which is fine, because then it would only take like 15, even less than that, expeditions in order to complete this triumph. Unfortunately, that's not how it works, because they're on a timer and they're random. So after 3 minutes of drilling at a drill site, a ruffian will spawn in. That's guaranteed. The other thing is, 1 can spawn in randomly, so you can get 2 at each encounter. However, 1's random, so you might not get it, and the other one requires you to be drilling for 3 minutes. And if you played Expedition, you know that that's unrealistic. You have to actually go out of your way to be a detriment to your team in order for it to last 3 minutes. I had to resort, as many other people did, to chucking treasure away from the hall to prevent your teammate from picking it up. I stopped shooting enemies so as less treasure would spawn. I had to actually be detrimental to my team and the progress that we were making in order to complete my seal. That should never be the case. They reduced it to 10, but ever since they did that, I've got way more ruffians when playing expeditions. So I don't know whether that's a complete coincidence or if that's actually a change they made to ruffians as well. It should have been left at 50 ruffians, but with the increased rate that I seem to be getting now, or it should have been left at 10 ruffians as it is now, but with the old rate. Otherwise, it's actually just too easy. The next thing is 15 of each crewmate has been reduced to 1. That makes no sense, because you can do it no problem. You're making a triumph unnecessarily easy in that regard. The upgrading of the star chart for just a 14 was also a bit silly, because it means you don't even have to do all the challenges for the reputes, I think they're called. You literally just have to do 14 of them, and it's fine, which made it a bit easy for me. On top of all this, as though it wasn't easy enough at this stage, I mean, there also are the still, somewhat difficult ones you still have to play through the entire season at least, but you only have to do 8 of the triumphs now, instead of 10, because they already removed 1 earlier on. So you can leave 1 of the triumphs just not done. And for me, I have the seal, but I only have 2 out of 3 weapon patterns. I don't believe that's the way it should be. I think you should have to do all the triumphs in a seal in order to get a seal. The seal, in my opinion, was a mess. It was way too difficult, and they've made it so easy now that it kind of discredits the amount of effort that went into it for people who got it prior to it being made easier. And I think what really should have happened is changes should have been made to the gameplay, not to the requirements of the triumph or of the seal. That's the way it went, and it's a big negative in my books. The second to last point is the community event. The community event was a bit thrown together, it seemed. I'm not really sure how it got brought about, but essentially there was no sort of announcement prior to it, other than I think in This Week at Bungie. There was no real message in the game unless it was a week beforehand, but the important part is you had to deposit 400 million captain's coins as a community in order to unlock all of the upgrades for the Elixir order. So a chest appeared in the tower, you went to and you deposited coins, you got coins from different activities, you could get them from basically everything in the game. Once we unlocked, I think, tier 2 of the upgrades, we could then deposit treasure coordinates, and tier 3 was treasure, like map fragments, or was the other way around, I don't really remember, but you could deposit the seasonal currency, which I think is a bit silly, because like surely you're going to be using that for your own sort of crafting of weapons and everything. And then you could deposit destination materials as well after that. So there was 7 different changes which were made to the Elixir Sneak Order. This is what I was saying earlier during the story section, where these changes were basically insignificant and didn't really make that much of a change. They were very minor changes, and because it's a community event, I expected it to be much bigger, and I think many other people did as well. These changes would have been much better suited to be spread over the season instead of as a community event. Really, this community event got what it deserved, because there was a glitch which made it so as you just duplicate treasure coordinates and deposit them into the chest, and suddenly on a wee graph at a pretty steady incline over the course of, I think, in a night we got up to 80 million coins, which meant that it was going to take a few days for us to complete it. Then it just shot straight up because everybody remembered you could just duplicate treasure coordinates, and suddenly it's finished. And now we're at about 2 billion. Really poor. I really love community events and live events and all this sort of community engagement, but it's always done so poorly. I mean, the live events weren't, they're fine, but the community events are always so bad. And even though this one's miles ahead of the trials one that they had like years ago, this was still so poor. I can't believe that they hadn't fixed the glitch prior to this event going live. Lastly, we have the finale, which turned out to just be a wee short cutscene at the very, very end of the season, which was showing Mithrax turning some of the relics, which are body parts of Mithrax, into a warm liquid, which Scene 14 then got Osiris to inhale, which then woke him up from his almost year-long coma, and he now knows stuff about Savathun's memories and about Neomuna and stuff, so that's pretty interesting, but ultimately it wasn't nearly as big as some of the other finales we've had at the end of seasons. I wouldn't say this is even a bad thing. Some people seemed a bit annoyed about it and that it was a bit of an anticlimax, but honestly, this season, I think it fits. This season strikes me more as a break. If anything, it's a break from the more higher stakes things in Destiny. There's been a lot of things recently which has been like The Witness, Savathun, Big Hive people, you know, the big stakes like Callus, Disciples, and, you know, Hive Guardians. And this season's just been the Elixir kind of just doing things, basically. You know, there has been Nezarec and those relics, and obviously the Witness trying to use Aramis to get those relics, but ultimately it's been more of like an Elixir building season, and I don't even think that's a bad thing. I assume next season, which we'll find out tomorrow, will be a bit higher staked, but I think it's a nice wee interval season, essentially. It's a season where you can go out and play another game if you want to, for a wee while, and there's not all that much happening. But I honestly think that's okay, because it's a bit relaxed. Not everything has to be these really massive stakes, and I think a lot of media does make the mistake of making every single thing like world-ending. It's like Marvel, I suppose, but Destiny is at least taking a wee break from that this season. Well, it has, because it's over now. That's that. That went on for a while. Please let me know what you thought of this season, and I hope you enjoyed my wee, well, quite long review of the season. I'll try to keep it shorter next time, but that's about it. So I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you enjoyed the season, and I will see you in the next one, which will be tomorrow for the new season.